Professor Sachs, good morning.
Good
Can
morning.
you hear me? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm fine. Thank you very much for your time, for your connection. And on behalf of Cooperatives of the America, President Graciela Fernandez and the entire board of directors, thank you very much for joining us via video conference. But thank you very much. We have this slots of around 15 minutes, and we were working in the last days. This is our 21st edition of the regional conference, and we have been working on the first day on the theme social and economic development, the second day yesterday on the cooperative contribution to the SDGs and UN 2030 agenda, and today we are working on the theme of knowledge economy for innovation and knowledge sharing. We would like to ask you several questions, but I will limit to three. Could you please share with us what does the term sustainable development means and implicates today?
Great. Thank you very much. Well, what a pleasure it is to be together with you. And I hope that I can be helpful for you, not only today, but going forward. I serve as an advisor to the United Nations Secretary General on the Sustainable Development Goals. And I direct a project for him called the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, SDSN. And the idea of the network is to bring universities to support the Sustainable Development Goals. But the universities can also support the cooperatives, and it can partner with your movement so that we can help make your actions more effective. We have many Latin American universities engaged, and I want to make an open invitation right from the start that we continue to explore ways to cooperate beyond your immediate meeting. Sustainable development means having more prosperity, more social justice, and environmental sustainability. So it's an economy that is more prosperous, more fair, and more environmentally sustainable. That's the basic idea. We have 17 sustainable development goals. I want to speak for a moment about rural cooperatives, farm cooperatives. In rural areas, there are big challenges with poverty, with the lack of services, with safe water and sanitation, with electrification, with clinics, with schools, and with the basic productivity of agriculture. The Sustainable Development Goals aim to create a better quality of life in which every person has access to health care, every person has access to safe water, every child has a place in school, at least through the upper secondary level. Everybody has modern energy services, electricity, and connectivity, information technology. So that is the purpose of the Sustainable Development Goals. Universal inclusion, including in the rural areas, and boosting the productivity of farmer cooperatives, for example, in key sectors. I can mention briefly that we recently issued a report about the coffee sector, which is, I think, a sector that is probably of interest to some of your members, for example, in Central America. Right now, there's a real crisis in the coffee sector. Prices are very low. productivity is rather low, poverty is quite high, and the climate conditions have become worse. And so we've recommended a series of steps to introduce sustainable development into the coffee growing regions, including the creation of a new fund, a coffee fund, that would be receiving money from the big roasters, for example, Nestle, and helping the poorer communities, especially some of the cooperatives. So this is the kind of practical steps that I would like to see undertaken to promote the sustainable development goals in the rural areas. I hope that that perspective can be helpful for you.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. And I take your last point. When you assess a government or the UN system, mainly a government or a big corporation, multinational, what's the main challenge you face in assessing them to invest into and engage with sustainable development goals?
Well, the first thing is to make them focus on the sustainable development goals, to know that they exist, that they are real, and that the governments have to take them seriously. And similarly with the companies just want to make money. The governments just want to stay in power often. And so getting a serious engagement with these goals is not simple. Moreover, to achieve these goals requires planning. It requires a time horizon that is longer than most governments have, at least 5 to 10 years looking ahead. And it requires a greater budget than is now being spent on issues like healthcare or education or rural infrastructure. So the first thing that I like to do is to make an assessment. What is the current situation? We have an annual report of the state of the Sustainable Development Goals in every country called the SDG Index Report. And that's at the national level. But if you're dealing with the rural cooperatives in particular areas, then it's important to have sub-national data as well to understand, for example, in the case of the coffee cooperatives that I mentioned, are there schools? Is there health care? Is there child labor when there should not be child labor? Is there extreme poverty? Making a set of measurements based on the sustainable development goals is very important. Then the next step is to say to governments, look, you're supposed to be guaranteeing universal access to higher education, but only 50% of the children are finishing school. What is the plan of action? Or to say to a company, look, you're dealing with a very impoverished area. The prices you're paying are very low. You're making a lot of money. You have to reinvest back into the sustainable development of your upstream source countries. That's what we've said to Nestle or to JAB Holdings, the two big coffee roasters. So what we need, though, is evidence, data based on the sustainable development goals to say, here is the gap between what is promised and the current situation, and more money needs to be allocated. There is, in general, a problem in most of the countries of the Americas that government does not raise adequate revenues, especially from the big companies and from the rich, and therefore it doesn't have enough to invest in health, education, and other social investments that are guaranteed under the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you. And in fact, the cooperative movement has its own instrument like the World Cooperative Monitor and other tools and methodology that will be presented in the next panel. So the key thing is data, as well as the strategic use of the data you can make in order to plan the engagement. My last question, Professor Sachs, is the following. The cooperative movement was born at the end of the 19th century and have always resisted to have change occurred into society worldwide, always creating employment, social inclusion, as well as economic development. How do you see the cooperative model today in front of other type of private sector businesses which have changed their business model engaging with the SDGs? What's the added value of cooperatives nowadays?
Well, I think cooperatives still have a major role to play, even though they are a century of tradition. Cooperatives can be very empowering for their members. This is clearly true in the rural case where individual farmers would not stand a chance to have a decent supply chain or to be able to negotiate over adequate prices or perhaps to directly market high quality output on e-commerce in the high income countries. And the cooperatives can provide the institutional framework for better inputs and better outputs, better prices, and social inclusion and democratic governance within the membership. This is the ideal. And I think that there are many, many successes of this. You know, the most successful countries in the world on the SDGs are the Scandinavian countries. They rank at the very top of the world charts on SDG accomplishment. Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, the Nordic countries, the Scandinavian countries. Those are places where the cooperative movement is very significant, as you know very well. And so I think that's a proven track record that cooperatives play an engaged role, not only in developing countries, but in the most successful economies in the world. And in this sense, I think the cooperative movement globally should tap into this major success story and see, therefore, the constructive role of the cooperative movement. We can say that one of the great challenges, of course, of our time is inequality and the sharp rise of inequality. And cooperatives have been an effective institution to resist this massive inequality. Say we're just a few big agro industrial companies own the land or grab the land. Cooperatives have been a way to protect the members and to have the efficiency of production. But I do think, as your topic is also about taking new technology, this is very important for the cooperative movement to improve the productivity and technology of its members. And we saw in the coffee study that many countries, most countries, had not really improved productivity for a long time. Brazil was an exception to that, where productivity has gone up sharply. But the way to raising productivity is through better science and new technologies. And here I would recommend a partnership of local universities with the cooperative movement so that you can have really excellent training, new innovation, and engagement of the research faculties in trying to find solutions for some of the very practical challenges that your members face.
Thank you very much, Professor Sachs. Los saludamos y los despedimos desde la 21 Conferencia Regional de Cooperativas Las Américas. Thank you very much for having joined the conference.
My
Have a
pleasure.
nice day.
Thank you
so
so much. All best wishes.